We've been in constant communication. The budget overall is $220 billion. It is balanced, and it pairs a bold vision with a fiscally responsible approach. Very important to me. We are making historic investments that will make a difference in people's lives right now, but also, and more importantly, these are legacy achievements that will be noted for years to come. Critically important based on how we saw ourselves become very vulnerable to a pandemic 2 years ago last month. We realized that the federal government bailed us out. Had it not been for the leadership of people later last year, President Biden, as well as Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, New York's own, we would not have had the resources to get out of a very difficult situation. With that knowledge, I knew that I had to ensure, we all had to ensure, that should this happen again, similar circumstances, or any cataclysmic event occurs, we cannot always rely on Washington to bail us out. That is why we are depositing, leading up to an historic amount of money, a record 15% of state operating funds will be in reserves. The 4% reserves that I inherited did not prepare us for the uncertainties of the future. I balanced a lot of budgets in my municipal work, 14 years on a local government, but every one of us, every year, we achieved those numbers to ensure we had the ability to be resilient and be able to fight back against whatever the winds would bring us. But I would say don't take that fiscal prudence for a lack of ambition. We're showing that we can tackle the big issues facing New Yorkers, especially the issues that many of our families are enduring right now, the issues that stress them out at night and cause them hard to get back to sleep when they wake up and think about the pile of bills on the kitchen table. So let's talk about some of those issues. Again, many families have suffered like that for a time, but everything has been hyper-exacerbated because of the persistent pandemic over these last 2 years. And on top of all of this, inflation had already started creeping up. Price of milk was going up, price of houses were going up, rental units were going up, everything was just going up and up. And now we have the gas. We understand what happened. We understand the necessity of stopping Russian oil from coming into our reserves. And I applaud everything President Biden has done to show that we are willing to stand with the Ukrainian people as they are under assault by a war criminal. But now we have to look at our people, where they are, meet them where they are right now at this time of great stress. This budget will put more money back in people's pockets. We all wanted to make sure that that was the outcome and lift those who have been hardest hit. Therefore, we are providing tax relief for middle-class families, as well as a new property tax credit for middle-income households, an investment of $2.2 billion that will help approximately 2.5 million homeowners. This, overall, the budget will give tax relief to 6.1 million homeowners. And as we tackle rising fuel prices, something that was constantly at the table as I spoke to the leaders about what we can do to give people just a break. People just feel like they're never getting ahead. And they have to know that their elected leaders have listened to them. That's why we are going to suspend from June 1st till December 31st the state sales tax on fuel, which will result in an estimated $585 million in relief for working families and businesses across our state. On top of that, we're already having conversations with counties, asking them if they will consider doing the same, so the cumulative effect is very impactful for people as they go to the pump and have that sense of stress in their chest when they think about the cost of the gas as they try to figure out if they're going to be able to afford it for the day. Our small businesses as well have been hit so hard by this pandemic. Sadly, many did not return. Small businesses, especially restaurants, just couldn't hold on during that time. And we hear their voices, especially as I've traveled across the state during the pandemic and afterward. Many companies, many small businesses have had to make tough financial decisions just to keep their workers safe under rules that we put in place because the pandemic was not over. And so we have to keep them alive. They had the personality and the charm to our communities. We have to make sure they keep their doors open. So we're launching a new tax relief program to help offset COVID-19 related costs. And we know what those are, whether it's getting a different environment in the workplace to make it safer, amassing different equipment and protective materials, testing kits, which are very critically important, home testing kits, as well as any changes they had to make to their exterior. You know, we saw the advent of many outdoor dining facilities that on their taxes, they'll be able to take a tax credit, offset those costs, again, putting more money back in their pockets for expenses that they never could have foreseen. This is a $250 million program to help bring additional relief for small businesses. But also, we want to continue bringing relief to those mom and pop small businesses and local restaurants. I was a waitress for a long time, 5 years, and I know how hard it is to hang on. They really bore the brunt of shutdowns and pandemic restrictions. So effective upon signing the budget, which I hope happens really soon, we'll immediately legalize the sale of to-go alcoholic drinks. First round is for the LCA. We'll have them shipped up there, but make sure you have some food with it as well. And I think all the team that's been working literally around the clock, they are looking forward to just having a little bit of relief. At the same time, helping our businesses that have been struggling for a long time. And I think this will be a very popular change for the people who wondered why it went away. And also, let's reflect back on how the pandemic changed our perspective of the healthcare system overall. The healthcare system depends on a strong, stable, and equitable healthcare system. And at the very foundation of this are healthcare workers. And we now have a crisis where healthcare workers who've been asked to do the impossible, literally 2 years after it started, still having to deal with patients and wondering why people aren't vaccinated to protect themselves and just dealing with so much stress in their own lives. We've lost a lot of them. We cannot continue to have the health care services that New Yorkers deserve under these circumstances. So to stop the hemorrhaging of healthcare workers, let's start by stop talking about we owe them a debt of gratitude and pay them some of that debt. That means dedicating in this budget $1.2 billion for frontline healthcare worker bonuses. And also, we've heard a lot about our home healthcare aides and workers. They've been through a lot as well. My own father is being taken care of a number of people around the clock, and we know how critically important they are to families and their sense of security. So we'll provide nearly $7.4 billion to support a wage increase, a $3 wage increase for home health care aides, and that's just the beginning. We're also going to invest $2.4 billion to improve our health care infrastructure, as well as dedicate $3.9 million in funding over 4 years to help our hospitals. Many of them lost their revenues when the elective surgeries were shut down. Many of them had to incur extraordinary costs. Some of them were never reimbursed for people who did not have insurance but needed health care, especially in our urban areas. That's an 88% increase over the prior 4 years. So together, this complete package worked out with our leaders will serve the objective of attracting more healthcare workers to deal with the shortage we're facing, as well as we have an ambitious plan to not say that the status quo is sufficient. You heard me talk about this back in January. I want to grow the workforce by 20% over the next 5 years. And we have a lot of specific details related to that, which we'll be announcing shortly, and how we'll actually accomplish that. That's not just a goal, we believe it's very achievable. Talk about other areas of our state that were hit so hard by the pandemic and are still reeling from the effects. Our teachers, our schools, our kids, and their weary parents who tried for a long time to keep it all together. And imagine being a teacher who's also a parent, trying to teach your children remotely at the same time your kids are trying to learn from their own instructors. We acknowledge that we also know that they need resources to rebuild. So we have a $31.5 billion program in total school aid, and I'll break that out for you. That includes a $2.1 billion increase compared to last year. Also, we heard a lot about litigation involving foundation aid. As you know, I settled the legislation months ago, and now we're making sure that that continues, it's sustainable, so we have $1.5 billion increase in foundation aid. We also know how important full-day kindergarten is, pre-kindergarten as well. So we are starting to invest even more robustly than it had been done in the past. And we're putting $125 million in additional funding for full-day pre-kindergarten, as well as a $451 million increase in all other school aid programs. And within that, we believe that children will benefit from mental health professionals in the school setting. I think there's a lot of parents who never thought their children would need this, and they do. We could not have foreseen the effect of isolation on our children, whether they were toddlers or whether they were teenagers. It's had a reeling effect. We need to help them heal. We need to help them come back and give our teachers and our schools the resources to deal with it, because this is not what they signed up for. They're doing magnificent, but they just want to get back to teaching and not have to deal with all these other issues. So we honor them every single day as we do our healthcare workers. Also, let's talk about higher education. Investments in higher education. Again, you've heard my family story, how the opportunity to get a higher education while he worked at the steel plant by day lifted my father and mother out of their circumstances. Also, we know that a lot of people don't have the luxury of saying they're going to be a full-time student. I've heard so many stories of students who work a semester, set aside the money, make the tuition payment the next semester, go back to school, back and forth, and we wonder why they can't get a 2-year degree in 2 years or a 4-year degree in 4 years. Let's help those people out. This budget includes, for the first time ever, $150 million to expand New York's tuition assistance program to cover part-time students. That'll benefit right now at least 75,000 students. So we're going to unleash the power of higher education to lift people out of their circumstances, and also to stop the disinvestment in SUNY and CUNY, and therefore we have a $400 million effort to help those institutions for their operations, as well as making sure that we support our teachers and school workers as well. The children who are not quite school age, those who are not in pre-K, those parents who desperately need child care. I am proud as a mother who had to leave a job because I could not find child care many years ago. Proud to announce that we're investing over $7 billion over 4 years into child care. Let me repeat that, $7 billion over 4 years into child care. That's more than double the level of New York's current support for child care subsidies. It's broadening the eligibility substantially for child care options for families. And through our investments, we'll be able to open the door to child care for more than half of the young people in New York. And that is spectacular. There are still people reeling from the effects of what the pandemic did to them when they lost their income, fearful about losing their ability to make their rent payments, getting behind in utilities, all these bills that just keep adding up. So we're going to continue. And as I put forth in my initial budget, we said we would set aside $2 billion to deal with these one-time, this year, pandemic-related crises. And I'm grateful again for the leaders to help us shape that with input from their members. Instead of me dictating where it should go, we approached it much more collaboratively. So working with them, $2 billion in recovering funding includes $800 million for a continuation of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, known as ERAP, $250 million to help people with utility arrears, people who got behind on those utility bills, $125 million in homeowner and landlord assistance, who are also hurt as well, not able to make their mortgage payments, as well as $25 million in one-time non-recurring investments. So that's a comprehensive approach to dealing with the money we put on the table that was very thoughtfully allocated by our collective efforts with both bodies. And we talked about how expensive things are. Housing. This is not new, but it has gotten much, much worse. And that is why I announced in my budget a $25 billion 5-year housing plan that will create and preserve over 100,000 affordable homes. And we talk about people in need of mental health services and supportive services. This includes 10,000 homes with support services for vulnerable populations. Also, this is the part we're going to have a lot more fun, and we start getting out there, springtime, all the construction projects. I know that the building trades and our construction workers are very excited about, again, I use the word historic a lot because it is historic. This is a record $32.8 billion in a 5-year transportation infrastructure plan. This is the largest investment in transportation infrastructure in the history of our state. It's also a 40% increase over the prior 5-year plan. We're not just rebuilding our infrastructure overall, we're also finding out how to adapt to climate change, making our infrastructure more resilient, So looking also at our vulnerabilities, we've talked about this. I announced this during Climate Week last September when I was fairly new on the job. But I also knew that $3 billion that was out there as part of a bond act, said, I don't think that's going to be enough. We had just come through the rages of not one but two hurricanes my first few days in office. We saw what can happen and how devastating it is. We have to build back resiliency around our communities and protect them. So we've added another $1 billion, actually $4.2 billion, so $1 billion on top of last year's $3 billion. My additions with the concurrence of the legislature, $4.2 billion in the landmark we call the Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act, as well as, in addition to that, $400 million in Environmental Protection Fund to support climate change mitigation projects. And let's talk about clean energy. I have probably done more clean energy announcements than anybody in this country. I'm constantly out there talking about these investments, and our green energy economy overall is going to create 10,000 new jobs, which I'm very excited about. So it comes down to the training programs, the workforce development programs, making sure that people can transition from their current jobs if they need to into transitioning to clean energy jobs. So we are going to be following up on my promise to have a $500 million investment, especially in our offshore wind opportunity. This is very exciting. I have seen what we did here at the Port of Albany, where we can literally manufacture component parts that are being used in offshore wind off of the shores of Long Island, and creating jobs all over the state, creating this supply chain, which is non-existent right now. And if you also notice, we've been more reliant upon foreign supply chains. We saw the disruption when our ports were shut down not that many months ago because of the congestion. So let's stop being vulnerable to what's happening in the geopolitical world in other countries. Let's make the component parts right here in the state of New York and create a new industry with these investments. And I'm very excited about this. And New York will continue to be the offshore wind capital for many years to come. Also, I keep hearkening back to what I said months ago. It seems like it was yesterday. I said that ethical governing would be a hallmark of my administration, that we'd change the culture here in Albany. I'm proud that this budget builds on that work. So let's talk about ethics oversight. One way we can restore trust in government is to address the existing system. I'll be repealing the structurally broken Joint Commission on Public Ethics and instead replacing with a transparent and accountable Commission on Ethics and Lobbying in Government. The commission is made up of 11 members, nominated by the Governor, Senate, Assembly, and newly added Comptroller and Attorney General, and they can make recommendations to law school deans or their designees. So there's another layer of scrutiny. Instead of people handpicking their appointees, the law school deans can give their approval or denial. It is not a rubber stamp. It is a different way of doing it. And the process of getting here was collaborative. And I want to thank many of the good government organizations who partnered with us to achieve major ethics overhaul, as well as including that votes are subject to FOIL and opens meetings law. More changes on the way. We'll be explaining how that works shortly. Another way to improve our transparency and accountability is to enhance the database of deals. A lot of questions about Empire State Development and deals. Let's put the spotlight on that. Let's make sure that the public and the media have access to that information. Audit of ESD Empire State Development tax expenditures to analyze cost benefits, and also boosting MTA's transparency. All of those were talked about and negotiated and are part of the budget. Another area we're going to be talking about is public safety. We have heard loud and clear that there's a lot of stress. People are anxious. I addressed this in January, and it's only gotten worse. A very basic human need is to feel safe and secure for yourself and your family and your parents. And when that evaporates, that shatters the foundation that every person needs to have in order to go forth and have a life where you can focus on your work, your family, other objectives. We have to establish that foundation of security once again, and we can do it while protecting the rights of individuals. And so, we are looking at factors when a judge sets bail. This has been an issue. This will now include a defendant's history of gun use and whether the crime involved was a serious one. Would it cause harm to people? And I want to say, as I mentioned in an op-ed that I wrote with the Lieutenant Governor just a few short weeks ago, as we explained our objectives in tackling this very complicated issue that has a lot of feeling associated with it on both sides. We're not here to undo the progress that was made in the past. Never been my objective, never will be. But I also said we have to realize there are areas where improvements can and need to be made. And so to the New Yorkers who are concerned about the rise in crime, we have put forth a comprehensive package that again achieves continuing the progress we've made in the past to make sure our criminal justice system is fair, and we are not moving backwards. We are moving forward with a thoughtful approach. We'll be protecting victims of domestic violence and hate crimes. We'll close loopholes in the discovery law that led to the unnecessary dismissal of too many cases. We're going to allow police to make arrests for hate crimes. As I mentioned, let's talk about bail again. We are now, for the first time, going to allow judges to set bail for gun charges that were previously subject only to release. Also adding factors that a judge must consider. As I mentioned, closing some problematic loopholes on raise the age and discovery, making Kendra's law more effective, all in the interest of making a safer and more just New York. Importantly now, we also have to address the increase in gun trafficking. You'll be seeing reports in a matter of days of the work that's been done by the Joint Interstate Commission that I established in January to have collaboration between our major cities in New York and in the New York Northeast, Boston, New York City, state police, as well as 9 states who are participating in this effort. You'll be seeing those numbers shortly. We also had to change the law to make it easier to crack down and prosecute illegal gun sales. We also have to stop something that was mentioned in the news this morning, the cycle of repeat offenders. We have to allow police to be able to arrest those who repeatedly commit serious crimes, and rather than just receiving a desk appearance. And we're also going to make more repeat offenses eligible for bail. But also there's an obligation on our part to not just make those kind of changes, but to balance the other side of the equation as well. Invest in resources for those who need it most. Invest in the mental health infrastructure to give people what they need. Provide resources to the district attorneys who are absolutely overwhelmed with the responsibilities that are now before them. And public defenders, so working together they can ensure a more perfect, a more fair system of justice. So these are meaningful and significant changes to our public safety laws. There's much more detail which we can outline for you on paper. We look forward to doing that. But it's an important step toward giving our local leaders the changes that are needed to make our communities, their communities as well, safer. But we're not stopping there. We also have to talk about gun violence disruption. Not just taking the guns out, but what is going on in these communities? Who are the interveners? Who are the people who could be the disruptors? We're putting $224 million to fund gun violence prevention programs. So when people find themselves in the criminal justice system, particularly our young people, that they are guided by people who perhaps had the same experience themselves to help them find a path out. That is our objective here, to stop that cycle, give them other opportunities, and that's what we're going to be very focused on. And we're going to continue focusing in with our law enforcement and community-based organizations, tripling the state guns violence intelligence resources, as well as tripling our investments in these gun disruptor outreach programs. We're also adding $13 million to expand the use of community stabilization units, $20 million to respond to the regional needs in the aftermath of gun violence. What people have forgotten, what happens to a community when there has been a shooting in that community or a constant sound of gun shooting, and you hear the stories of 12-year-olds and children who've lost their lives just innocently sitting in a vehicle or on their front porch or in a carriage. This has an effect on people's psyche, and we can no longer ignore the impact on communities. They need a sense of security as well. Everyone does. Let's focus on that. So these are bold steps. They're thoughtful steps. There was a lot of passion behind the discussion, and again, I'm very proud that we're able to work through this collaboratively with our leadership, with a lot of input from their members as well as our partners in the community. And we're going to work to continue to restore New Yorkers' sense of safety. We're going to continue to work on final language the next few hours. The end is near. But there's also items, because of the intense amount of time involved in dealing with public safety, which, as you know, was a high priority. We also have some urgent items that need to be addressed before the end of the session. We'll have time to do that, to address affordable housing, to address mayoral control. We'll have time to address clean slate language, which I had proposed in my budget initially, which we want to make sure gets done. And I'll close with this. During my State of the State, I called for a new version of the American dream, a better, fairer, more inclusive version that I called the New York dream. This budget is a blueprint for the future. It is an embodiment of that dream. And not only are we going to recover from the ravages of a pandemic, we're going to emerge from it even stronger. That was my promise to you then. And now with this budget, in the final hours, I know that this budget is going to be part of what's going to lead us forward. And we will have, with this budget and the relationships that were cemented working through this process in a collaborative, respectful way, we will now be able to usher in a new era for New York, where everyone is treated equally and fairly, access to the same opportunities to prosper, and we are going to continue when we leave here working around the clock to achieve that dream and reality for all New Yorkers. Thank you very much.
I want to ask you about the Bills Stadium. It seemed to cause some controversy during these discussions as they were ongoing. Do you regret the manner in which you announced it, and what does the final financing package for it look like?
A lot of things on life I can't control, including timing. I believe this was explained that the NFL, which was going to make a sizable contribution to the overall cost, was meeting on March 28th. We had to know what their deal was in order for us to say that we're ready to go forward. Could have been done earlier, but it wasn't. That was their annual meeting, so that was the timing on that.
And how will it be financed in this budget?
We have a dedicated fund set up, the Gaming Settlement Proceeds Fund, is that what we're calling it?
It's a settlement proceeds fund.
A settlement fund that was established with the proceeds that we were able to derive. It was established in Western New York. That money had been not collected for many, many years. Again, this was not taxpayer dollars. This was money generated from casino revenues, from the people who live in those communities. And so setting that forth and allocating about $182 million, $182 million from that to offset the state's contribution of $600 million to a $1.4 billion initiative, drops down our share to, as I mentioned, 182. So that'll be reflected in the budget. The total amount, 600, will be reflected. And also, there's some question about whether or not there's escalation costs, whether the state's on the hook for any increases. No, I firmly negotiated that that would not be part of it. So we're through that, and I do appreciate the support and the energy behind the conversations. There was a lot of passion. This is a regional priority for part of our state. We also have many other regional priorities that we're addressing for other parts of the state too. We'll be able to share those with the public, and I'm really looking forward to leaving here, number one, but also getting on the road and going out to other parts of the state to talk about what we're doing for other parts of the state. Yes.
Governor, when it comes to Kendra's law, is that something that's going to be part of the budget? Mental health advocates are worried that proposed expansion will violate New Yorkers' rights and lead to continuously improved orders of involuntary commitment.
This is part of the conversation to address the situation which has unfolded, particularly in the city of New York. We have had close collaboration with everyone involved in this, and there is language that addresses this, but not sacrificing the rights of individuals, but focusing on public safety and making sure people get the medical attention they need. And as part of my budget, you're hearing that this is just an overview. We can provide, and it'll take much longer, and I'll have Robert and the rest of my team involved in literally point by point laying this out, because we're just still, it's at 3 in the morning, we're still working out details, now. But we are going to make sure that there are over 1,000 psychiatric beds available because there are people that need care, they need attention, they need to be on a path to recovery, and they can't get it as long as there's beds that are not available in a place that can be helpful to them. And so we're focused on, their lives and their quality of life and their ability to heal. So that's an important part about what we've been talking about.
Governor, what do you say to immigrant communities that are dissatisfied that undocumented children were left out of this child care expansion? And could you confirm the final details about coverage for all and it only involving people, undocumented people that are over 65 years old?
Well, I'll start with that because right now, undocumented individuals have available to them the ability to get emergency health care in hospitals. There are about 300,000 people who signed up and take advantage of that service, so that is out there already. And truly more could sign up, and I hope the advocates know that that could actually has more capacity, so there should be more for people. So people do get services. It's not ideal, but it is better than having no services. That's available now. Right now, children up to the age of 19 are covered. Undocumented children right now get health care coverage in our state, so that is also a category that are covered. But what came to my attention was the fact that new mothers who get medical care up until the birth of a child, pregnant mothers, they get nothing when the baby's born. It cuts off. And I've had a couple of kids, and I know you need follow-up visits, and you need attention, and sometimes there's complications. So we actually put in our budget, which I thought was, compassionate, funding, first time ever, services for the first year of a mother's postpartum experience, for first year life, year of the baby. But also, I know there was a lot of interest in trying to have this cover everyone. What we also said was that we would reach out to the federal government and ask for a waiver, which right now prevents there to be coverage for undocumented individuals based on federal law under the essential plan. So we said, give us time to let this play out, but in the meantime, I was thoughtful, again, with an elderly father who needs a lot of health care services. Who else is the most vulnerable? Who can we help now before we get this other area resolved? And we said, how about people over 65? Let's make sure that they have services. So we have not done this before. And I know the advocates will recognize that this has been talked about a long time, doing anything. And we're the first administration that actually listened and did something. And I think people, as we talk about how this unfolds over the next year and next year's budget, what the state of play. And child care, you also mentioned child care. I don't forget anything. We don't have universal child care for documented children. We expanded, but we don't have a program now that they're being left out of at all. So I think that's just an important point to make to everybody.
Governor, this one is for both you and for the Lieutenant Governor. The opponents of further changes to bail reform have said up to this point, and will likely continue to say, that it will be an evil if it leads to additional minorities being incarcerated. Is your position that that will not happen, or that if it does happen, because police chiefs will often say that the calls for service are coming from minority communities, if it does happen, are there reasons that don't have to do with a broken system for that taking place, or do you think that is not going to happen?
I can't stand here and say that someone who has been accused of a serious crime or commits a crime over and over and over, especially the retail theft that is just so hard for our hard-hit businesses, that people, the stories are legendary and actually rather shocking. There will be consequences for people in those situations. I'm focused on intervening with our young people, making sure that the violence disruptors rescue them early, that they hear their stories. I literally sat down just a few weeks ago in Brooklyn and convened many of them and said, what do you need? How can we help you do your jobs? Because I want to stop this before it escalates. So there are opportunities for us to be smart, provide alternative programs, create jobs and opportunities. But yes, ultimately I need to protect the people in all communities, in communities of color and everywhere. People need protection, and we believe that these common sense changes, again, we're not undoing bail reform, we're just saying where are some of the weaknesses, what can be bolstered, what offenses would people think should be covered. We added 3 gun offenses to be considered to be bail eligible that were not. So we'll give you a chance to dissect and understand all the elements. They really have been written up until not too long ago, but did you have any comments on that, Lieutenant Governor?
Sure. I think from a philosophical standpoint, one of the things that is important in our approach has been we understand that there are root causes, which is part of the question that you asked. There are root causes that are key to some of the issues that we're seeing: poverty, lack of job opportunities. There are mental health issues, education system. We can go on and on and on about some of the key fundamental factors that have caused some of the concerns in our communities. I mean, no child is born into as someone who can cause certain things. Society and various activities get them there. So what we have tried to do is say, number one, we want to have accountability, particularly for crimes that are serious and can really harm people. But at the same time, and in my view, extremely importantly, which is very different from what I've seen in the past, we've said, let's invest in some of those root causes. Workforce development. We're putting significant money into trying to give children jobs, giving young people jobs, investing in mental health beds, as you're going to be hearing. We're trying to deal with some of the root core causes that we believe make a difference. You know, recidivism is a huge issue, so we're focusing and investing on that. And I think doing both, investing in root causes, dealing with some of the fundamental issues on the ground, while also dealing with some key accountability measures with a scalpel, right? Not with a sledgehammer. If you look at how we have addressed some of these key points, we've been very targeted. This is, and because we don't want to over-criminalize in any way, shape, or form people of color in particular. At the same time, we recognize that there are some root issues that we have to deal with, and we're focusing on that. The Office of Gun Violence Prevention, I'll just say this and I'll end. You know, we have been traveling all over the state, as the governor mentioned. I've been in Rochester, we've been in Buffalo, we've been in Syracuse, all over the city, and we're talking to some of the key people on the ground who are saying, yes, we need to be safe, and there's some key issues that need to be addressed, but you also have to invest in housing. You also have to invest in mental health. You also have to, and so we're looking to do both at the same time. And I think the Interstate Task Force on Illegal Guns is really one of those key places where let's not just deal with the situation when it happens on the ground. Let's try to stop the guns from getting there in the first place. So we're trying to be multi-layered and thoughtful and strategic in how we are addressing this problem. It's a serious problem, one that I know personally, and I thank the governor for her efforts on this.
A lot of the solutions you mentioned require a buy-in from the community, and on the individual level, are you getting that buy-in from the affected communities? Is the black community engaging with the violence interrupters and with the job opportunities, or would you like to see more of that?
We'd like to see more of that, and that's what we're looking to do. That's why the governor has introduced an Office of Gun Violence Prevention that is going to be focused specifically on this effort. $224 million that is going to go towards investing in root causes, working with communities. I remember we were just in Rochester, and there were some snug groups and some church leaders who hadn't communicated in the way they should before. So we're helping to create collaboration, bringing people together, and providing resources and investments from the top down to say, listen, this is a problem we have to deal with together. We're not just going to have this law and order kind of way of addressing this. Accountability is important, but it is very important that we invest and we work together. So we're going to be doing this all over the state.
1 second. I'll address public safety as well. And thank you for the thoughtful response. And you know, you've brought a lot of input from these meetings around the state, which have been helping drive our response. But also, just to be details released and you'll be able to analyze it, but just let me help you understand some of the factors that we've changed here as part of our public safety strategy. We're going to be expanding the factors that judges consider when setting bail. The history of gun use, violating an order of protection, and whether or not they're charged with a serious harm. We're also going to be looking at the bail and arrest eligibility for repeat offenders and hate crimes, repeat offenses with harm to a person or property, repeat offenses for property theft with limited exceptions for crimes of poverty, close the desk appearance loophole, which exists right now, and make sure that all hate crimes are arrest eligible. Also, as I mentioned, I don't know if that was understood as well, but bail eligibility for gun offenses. There are new felony gun offenses that are bail eligible. That include sales to minors, defaced weapons, which are altered, you know, whether it's scratching off the serial number or whether it's doing something to be able to hide it, or possession on school grounds. I mean, these are areas that had not been captured before under the current law. Also want to make it easier to prosecute gun trafficking. taking down what constitute gun trafficking from 10 guns down to 3. Or in cases of that's a C felony versus a B felony, and a number changes dramatically as well. So the prosecution, or the possession of 3 or more of these guns will constitute a presumption of the intent to sell. We also had a problem with the discovery statute, and we were able to work out this situation by listening to the public defenders and listening to the district attorneys. And they came up with a thoughtful approach that we all had a lot of conversations about to make sure that we could fix it so hate crimes and domestic violence and other were not dismissed so easily, and cases were no longer going to be automatically dismissed if prosecutors failed to make a late disclosure, which is the case now. A lot of cases are being dismissed if they operate in good faith. And I mentioned also closing the raise the age loophole. You could have a case where someone is 16 or 17 and they are charged with an offense, but they don't end up in court until they're over 18. That's sort of limbo here, and the cases were dismissed. So there were areas which just needed some fixing, and as well as mentioning some of the other areas, but we're just making it harder to traffic in illegal guns. I want those guns off the streets. I want to stop this cycle of violence and stop the headlines that are talking about lives being destroyed, especially children, and these are primarily occurring in communities of color. That has to stop. We have to protect everyone. Nick?
Governor, could you talk a little bit about how this budget can be kind of recession-proof, considering that there are some concerns about the economy going south next year?
That is the whole premise behind the $5 billion we are putting into our 15% reserve fund. A lot of pressure to spend it right now, but we also have historic spending because of a lot of circumstances. The reason we have resources this year, and perhaps this year alone, is unprecedented money from the federal government, very high tax receipts right now, and also a good stock market. All of those are volatile, especially the money coming in from the federal government. That's why we had to be very fiscally prudent while not giving up our bold vision, setting aside the money. So that's how we help the future budgets not be hit by a loss in revenue, because we've been able to expand critical programs that have been underfunded for a long time. We are changing people's lives with this document, with this budget. But we also don't want to get into a situation where 3 to 5 years down the road, there have to be rollbacks. That's how you manage money. That's how people manage their households. That's how you manage a business. That's how we should manage state government.
What's the additional $4 billion, though? Now, of course, the budget proposal is $220. In January, it was $216. Where did that $4 billion come from? Was it raising taxes? Did it come out of the reserves? And then also wondering if you could respond to, will Brian Benjamin remain on your ticket? Have you lost confidence in him? And also a question for the Lieutenant Governor. Do you regret not informing the governor about the subpoenas that were your campaign received before you started your job as Lieutenant Governor?
I have utmost confidence in my Lieutenant Governor. This is an independent investigation related to other people, and he's fully cooperating. Well, he is my running mate. Okay, go ahead.
Let me answer your question. So the state police did a thorough investigation. I participated in that, and the state police gave a recommendation to the governor, and that was the process. And that's typically the process for any for appointments. So I followed the process as it was supposed to be followed.
Why didn't you tell the governor? If you knew you had a subpoena, why didn't you just tell her she was making you the lieutenant governor? I mean, it seems like it would have come out at some point, right?
So again, the process was, I dealt with the state police. That was the process, and I spoke to them. I dealt with them, and they made a recommendation to the governor.
You didn't tell them.
I did not say that. I did not say that. That you're.
It was like a box that said, is there like a regulatory agency?
So, I don't know if you want me to go back and forth.
I will tell you that the
not
question
true.
you answered, or the question you asked before this, is the one that New Yorkers want to hear, and I'm happy to address that right now. How is that $4 billion being spent to lift people up, better their lives, and help them get through this pandemic? We had said back in January that instead of me designating where $2 billion of this one-time pandemic relief, and again, this is for this year only, this is not continuing to next year, how it should be spent. We had ideas. We knew programs that were needed to continue to be funded, whether it's ERAP, whether it's utility arrears, whether it's people helping them get through all sorts of circumstances. And we decided to just do things differently here in Albany and say, let's put that $2 billion unrestricted on the table and have conversations with the leader of the Senate and the leader of the Assembly, the Speaker, and that's what we did. So those are the programs I outlined, $850 million for ERAP, and I have a whole series of initiatives. The additional is support that was asked for a whole host of initiatives, building up SUNY and CUNY even more than our funding. The child care additions that we wanted to make, I had proposed $1.4 billion in child care after very spirited conversations, a lot of people, hearing from people. This is what the process is, listening to people. That's how we do it. They wanted more money for those areas, pre-K. Robert, is there anything else that was sort of?
No, just on the financing, which you asked, right? So as the governor mentioned, she set aside $2 billion in her budget. In addition, we had a consensus revenue forecasting process where, with the legislature, we agreed that there was $1.2 billion in additional revenues on top of that. And then when we closed out the fiscal year, there was additional surplus on top of that. So those resources together are what finance it. And it did not impact at all the reserve deposits. As the governor mentioned, we're also making a $5 billion deposit in the reserve fund.
Governor, to follow up on Bernadette's question, have you or any member of your administration received a subpoena related to the fundraising investigation? And could you also explain why the undocumented children aren't eligible for the child care subsidy? Is there some sort of federal law that prevents that from happening?
First question, no. Second question, what are the parameters of the child care money? It is federal money.
Right. There is no, the subsidy program, the child care subsidy program is largely a federal program. The governor doubled the amount of state resources in that program in the executive budget. And yes, under federal law, right, they're not eligible. You cannot use the federal subsidies for that program.
But again, I just want to address that. Again, this is a smaller population of children because they are eligible for the school age, the 3-year-old pre-K, the 4-year-old, which we are investing significantly in to make that available to undocumented and documented children. So they will be captured as we continue to expand and roll that out all over the state of New York. And so.
Environmental advocates are blaming you for not pushing hard enough on a measure to electrify new buildings. What's your response, and will you continue to push for a ban on natural gas in new construction? And how has the opposition from labor unions and fossil fuel industry groups influenced your thinking on that?
The old multi-part question here. Let me break it down for you. No, yes, and no. But don't quote me on that. What I would say is to the advocates who work closely with us, they are very excited about my transformative clean energy initiatives, what we talked about, what we released back in September during Climate Week. It was, we had the administrator of the EPA with us on the rooftop of Javits, I recall, and they could not believe what we were doing to be nation leading in that space. And I know the advocates are very excited about the additional $1 billion that I put into the Bond Act, and they're working hard to make sure that gets over the finish line in November. We all have to work toward that objective. But also, for people who, this is policy and a budget. Okay? We also have the rest of the session. As I mentioned, there's already some unfinished business that we'll be taking up. The legislators cannot wait to get back to work, I'm told, to work on the initiatives for the rest of the session. Again, the relationship has been established. A lot of people weren't used to or understanding how I would approach things differently. I've had an opportunity to establish very clearly how we do things differently here in Albany. So we're going to roll up our sleeves between now and the end of session and work to achieve some of the issues that are still important to people. Some of them are very complex, and as I mentioned, we spent a lot of time working on some of the key issues that I wanted to have accomplished, and I appreciate the cooperation as people wanted my first budget as governor to be successful. So the advocates know we live to see another day, and those days are around the corner. That's
Where are they priority for you or not? The gas ban on new construction?
We're very interested in achieving those goals.
Where are the other legislative leaders? Why aren't they here with you today?
Because we had some very complicated issues to resolve. So this is not the normal cycle, as you understand, but they're all worth the effort. They were worth a slight delay, which this is the same day the budget finished a year ago. So we spent a lot of time together, constantly on the phone, talking, Zoom calls, conversations literally at 3 a.m. So I understand, we talked about, we wanted to take an opportunity here to have our conversation directly with you. They are presenting, the Assembly's not quite finished, they're still working on it, so the leader in the Senate's at a different point. So the alternative was to wait even longer till we were all done with our responsibilities, but I was so looking forward to getting in front of all of you that I did not want to delay it a single day longer. All right, thank you, everybody.
New York City casinos, there's a lot of talk about local control. What is that going to look like in the final budget? There was talk about a 6-member panel. Are they going to have veto power over sites for New York City casinos?
They'll be involved in the process because I do believe there should be local engagement, and they'll be part of the early siting discussions. But the process, this is again the give and take, and this is the beauty of the democratic process. That all of you, if you look closely, will realize has unfolded over the last few weeks. A lot of give and take on accomplishing important goals. I want to see the additional licenses for 3 casinos in the state of New York. In New York City, there was strong interest in having representation from the Assembly member and the senator who represent an area where a site could go. With that, we realized that the mayor should have a say, the governor has a say, let me think who else is on our list. We had borough president and the city council member. Okay, so, thank you. So we put that in place. Again, upstate versus downstate, the city has a different interest. Upstate was very excited about this. The city has their process of evaluation of sites, and so we're going to let that unfold. Again, we heard from people. They want to make sure that this review committee has say, but also in terms of veto, does not have veto. Does not have. They're involved. They have to approve it, right? They have to approve the process before it goes further. Yeah. So it's maybe a majority.
So you would need a majority approval early in the process from this board.
What this does is it allows the community to be involved, to their elected leaders, and also stops people from spending a lot of time and energy on something that may not have the local support. But we believe that there is a strong interest and objective in creating thousands of jobs in having opportunities for downstate casinos.
What happens if the board splits?
If the board splits?
Yeah, 6 members, correct?
Has to be 4 votes.
4, yeah.
How soon will we need the 3 downstate licenses?
I'm sorry.
There's the housing system value program.
Okay. All right, we've got 1 or 2 more.
Governor, could you just explain a little bit about your strategy here in the negotiations, how you're trying to do it differently? Some legislators thought that the late ads that were brought to the table contributed to the late budget. Some thought that there was an inexperience in your team with Albany. Can you explain what your strategy was on this?
No, we're not inexperienced. We know how to get things done. I have been accomplishing many goals, unexpected victories in our approach to what we've been working toward. But this, to me, needed to be a collaborative process. This was not winners and losers. That is what I set out to do. This was not playing out in the press to get advantage by dissing one person's point of view and trying to score points. That is why we are going to walk out of this process holding our heads high, that we achieve something that is very different. So that is why you did not see the traditional commentary, and I'll leave it at that, about each other's positions. I wanted to change people's perception of government. As I stood here on August 24th, I said I want people to believe in government again. And they want to know that we roll up our sleeves and work for them and don't fight each other. So that is what I believe we've achieved. My team is second to none. Even with COVID, I will stack them up against anybody any day. I really will. They were thoughtful. They also embraced my different approach to this. I know how to be combative. I did not need to be combative to achieve this. And I'm very proud of what we were able to achieve in a way that we showed respect to both bodies, respect to their members, and we'll look forward to going into their districts. I'll be with Leader Cousins in Yonkers very soon, talking about projects in her area. We'll be in the Bronx with the speakers soon. We're going to start hitting the road. I cannot wait to start celebrating the achievements in this that address so many people and their needs and their stresses, and that's what I'm most proud of.
Governor, how much money are New Yorkers going to be saving for a gallon of gas now? And is the housing assistance voucher program in the budget?
It is not in the budget, and they'll be saving 16 cents per, we're suspending the state sales tax? 16 cents, state sales tax and the motor tax. We're also having conversations with the county county executives around the state, encouraging them to do the same, so there is a bigger impact that you feel. And as I mentioned, you notice what I think 4 states have taken action. 4 states out of all the states have taken some proactive step toward dealing with the escalating cost of gas at the pump. Florida, interestingly, says theirs doesn't go into effect until October. They must know what the future is going to bring. And then other states have done it for 30 days. So we decided that we'd give that longer sense of people understanding that we will absorb this with the resources we have and not underfund existing programs, but absorb it with what we have to give people a relief. And to do a short term, which was also debated, 2-3 months, then what you have is the spectacle of people at the start of the summer driving season, when different blends of gas increase the prices, and all of a sudden when we restore the taxes at that time, that's a hard hit for people. And I don't know that this is going to be resolved by then. So I know people are going to appreciate this. And again, working with the counties, they are willing to collaborate and do the same, because our sales tax is capped at $2. It does not continue to escalate. Counties do not have a cap, so there is a windfall in that sense. As the cost of gas goes higher, they bring in even more in their sales tax revenues. So we're just looking to give people relief. Property taxes, making sure that we have the money to give people the rebates, the middle class tax cut, I believe it's $1.2 billion, rolling that out sooner. So now and we'll find other ways. We'll come up with other ideas between now and the end of session to stop the assault on middle class families, because they have suffered enough. All right, thank you, everybody.